In this video, I'm going to show you how you can update your Bright MLS seller closing costs and buyer closing costs. So that way, when you want to run seller net sheets and buyer closing cost estimates, you can do them quickly without thinking about all of the other fees and updating them as you go. So you just update them here, and then as you go, you can modify them based on whether or not, for example, the buyer's doing a septic inspection. You can delete that. Or if you're in one county versus another where the seller typically does not pay for the deed preparation, you can delete that. So what you do is you go to Financial and then go to Buyer Closing Costs, and then you click on Preferences. Leave municipality blank because that will be filled out when you are doing this on a specific property. And school district, again, same thing. So under mortgage origination costs, typically the buyer is going to pay for the appraisal, which may be $550 or less. They will pay for their credit report, which hopefully is $100 or less. The $1,000 doc prep fee is basically a placeholder for what most lenders are charging as far as what they call an application fee, commitment fee, application fee. It's just a catch-all category for the typical charge. So some companies might charge $895. I've also seen 11 something, so 1,000 is pretty typical. I put in 25 for a flood certification stating it's not in a flood zone. Maybe it is in a flood zone. In that case, the insurance. Tax escrow, so the lender can actually pay your property taxes every year when they're due. They need to set that account up. And $100 in case the buyer does any wiring throughout the transaction. So if the buyer does want to get a survey, it will cost a few $100s to get the survey itself, maybe $300 or $400. But if they want to stake out where the corners of the property are, then they would need to pay per location. So a square property would have 4 posts. A property that was irregular might have 6 posts or something like that. So this is just a 4-corner property estimate for a survey. Typical deed and mortgage recording fees, $77 and $360. Commission paid by buyer, so that's whatever your conveyance fee is that you charge. And make sure that it is in your buyer agency agreement and in your listing agreement that you are charging this fee. It's also mentioned in your affiliated business disclosure form as well. Regular home inspection, so about $500. If a buyer is inspecting a really large property, or maybe it's a multi-unit, that number might go up, but 500 is pretty good. Deed prep, again, it depends on which county you are in, what the custom dictates, but obviously the contract indicates whether the buyer or the seller is paying for it. To get a termite pest inspection, about $150, radon about $125. If you're doing the well water inspection, this I believe includes getting a pressure test. Getting a septic inspection, this includes getting it pumped first and then doing the Class H inspection. And then the attorney who's doing the title work, about $450. And that's all you have to do in order to create your preferences for the buyer side. So you click Save, and your preferences have been saved, and you hit OK. Now you go Financial, Seller Net Sheet, and you go Preferences. Whatever commission you like to get, put that number in here. I like to get 6%, pay half of that to the buyer's agent. And the conveyance fee that I charge, $495, I put that right there. On the left, so the settlement fee of $75 is the deed prep fee. You could also alternately do it like this and make it a charge and just charge $75 there. So I think I'll save it like that. For the VA buyer, the seller is paying for the termite cert, so I included the wood infestation certificate. But when you are doing this and you have a conventional or FHA buyer, you can just delete that from your seller's proceeds. Again, and if you're in a county where typically the buyer pays for deed prep or they're not paying for deed prep, you can make that a 0. But at least you have the default of it being here. That way you can always delete it later. If you're providing a home warranty, I just put in $485. If you're providing a home warranty for the buyer, if you find that the home warranty your clients typically select is more expensive or less expensive, just put that number in here and save it. For a septic inspection, so let's say the seller hasn't done a Class H and it hasn't been 36 months yet, so you would want to put in $600, so that covers them doing the Class F pumping and the Class H inspection. And then the mortgage satisfaction, put in $150, wire payoff $70, and the deed prep $75. Obviously, we don't know what the seller owes at this point, and when we get the mortgage payoff in the transaction, we'll know with more certainty. Do ask for the seller to tell you how much they owe on their mortgage and round up a couple $100, because usually there are a couple $100 in fees to pay it off at the time that they pay it off. And then you hit save. Your preferences have been saved. And that's how you update your seller net preferences. And just to show you what it looks like when you are working with a property, I'm just going to use the property that we just did a video for. And what you do is, when you're working with the seller, hit the S $sign. And again, we think maybe James has passed on, so we're just going to delete his name. And you wouldn't need to touch anything here on the left because that's pre-filled in. We will fill in the date. Well, when you do the listing, you're just going to estimate a future date for closing. You know, maybe do 60 to 120 days out. But now that we have a contract on the property, I'm going to put in the date that the buyer chose, which was September 29th. They're offering $340. And in this case, I believe I pretended like she owes $150. And the seller assist was in a dollar figure, $10,000. And let's say I'm charging 6%. Actually, I believe they were charging 5% and $495. I don't know about the $495, but the brokerage commission was 2.5% to the buyer. So this number might be 5%, it might be 5.5%. I don't know as the buyer's agent, but I'm pretending like I'm being the listing agent right now. So I'm putting 5% and $495. And then you'll notice the transfer tax automatically pre-populates. The wood infestation certificate is $125 because it is a VA buyer. We're not offering a home warranty, so we will make that 0, although there are a lot of great reasons to do that. As the seller, she did do a septic inspection, so we don't need her to do that. Mortgage satisfaction, so we'll leave that. We'll leave the wire payoff. And then the deed prep, I put as the seller paying. Well, first, I always like to save these, and that way you have a baseline. So if you do this with the listing and you find out what the seller owes, you'll have that estimate of what they owe saved on your computer, so you don't have to remember it. And then I hit print, and then you can see that the gross sales price is $340. After I pay off, or the seller pays off their first mortgage, they have $190 in gross equity, the 2% transfer tax, the 5% plus $495 commission, the $10,000 seller assist, the termite cert, and then the mortgage satisfaction, wire payoff, deed prep are all there. The seller's going to get reimbursed for taxes paid through the end of the cycle for taxes, so they're going to get a credit of $1968.70. And then ultimately you add everything up and you subtract everything out, and the net proceeds is $157. And what you do is you want to hit print and then save it as a PDF. And I like to save things according to their address. And I always like to give it something meaningful, seller net at $340. So now if we want to do the same property for the buyer, we can actually do address search. We can do recent searches, and you can see that was the most recent search I did. And then hit B $sign, and the buyer closing estimate will come up. We're going to leave the sales price as $340. We're going to put in the settlement date of September 29th. The interest rate, so whatever the interest rate is today, go up a little higher. That way it's worst case scenario for your client. So I'm just going to use 3.5, and maybe 1/4 to 0.5% higher is fine. And then we're requesting a $10,000 assist, so I put in the $10,000. Buyer's name, in this case it's Evan Woods. Earnest deposit, we just used $5,000. We changed conventional to VA. It should go down to 0%. 30 years, you can see he's paying a VA funding fee. We'll go more over that in other videos. VA took out that document prep fee because they're not allowed, I guess, to charge a fee called that, but they are allowed to charge a one large fee as for their services. So I'm just going to put that back in as a mortgage origination, and it's not prepaid, it's unpaid. The appraisal most likely will be prepaid, so I'll leave those there. Also, this automatically took out that tax escrow service because it doesn't get paid by the buyer. There's just different rules for VA loans, but you see the transfer tax, deed, mortgage recording. The homeowner's insurance, you always have to fill it out. It'll never come up in your default. So we'll call it unpaid, meaning it gets paid at closing. And just because there's a lot of outbuildings, I'm just going to call it $1,800. Get to know some insurance companies, send them a couple properties and say, hey, what's the insurance on this one? Or talk to your colleagues to find out what's normal. So he's doing the home inspection. Because there's some outbuildings, I'm just going to make it $800. We are doing termite. We are not doing radon. He is doing water and septic, so we'll leave those there. And the seller is paying for deed prep, so we'll delete that. And then the rest of this should be good, and you'll see the summary down below. $19.27 is his monthly payment, and he needs $86.92 out of pocket to purchase the property. So before you do anything else, save this, and we will save it with 725 Union. And then I always like to make a note, the price, because if I'm running a couple estimates with FHA, VA, conventional, just depending on the buyer, with and without a seller assist, I might name it something to reflect what it actually is. And then I hit print. This is so much easier for me to visually look at than the scrolling to the bottom of the prior form. You could see total needed $86.92 and $19.27. When we do the other video with the actual closing estimates I put together, I think I used the higher insurance rate here, so that's why it's a little higher in the monthly payment. The other one I think is $19.02. But anyway, that is how you change your default buyer closing cost preferences in MLS and the seller closing cost preferences in the MLS so that you can create quick closing cost estimates and seller net sheets for your buyers and your sellers. Good luck!